the lid's off the cookie jar. Hello, I'm Christine Bruce, broadcasting through CICK 93.9 FM on Wet'suwet'en territory, or Smithers, BC. We all have a stake in our country, but we aren't all getting an equal share in its riches. That's the thinking behind a new Canadian think tank, which is offering some suggestions for how to bring equity back to the average citizen's wallet. Floyd Marinescu of UBI Works, and now an initiative called Commonwealth, is here to explain how everyone can have a cookie. According to their website, Commonwealth Canada is a society, a think tank, a new community of like-minded individuals who share a vision of a future where everyone can benefit from the value of our natural and co-created wealth. The core team of Commonwealth Canada previously launched UBI Works, whose mission is to make basic income a key election issue, with the goal of seeing it implemented nationwide. Both of these projects resonate with me. Basic income alleviates poverty, while Commonwealth suggests ways to share and preserve our natural riches. Floyd, I want to welcome you to the Cookie Jar. You and I have been on a similar path for several years now. At least I've been fascinated with basic income.
It's great to be here, and you've been part of UBI Works helping us with digital activism for some time.
So you have been advocating for a universal basic income for a while. And in fact, you're the founder of UBI Works. So let's start with that. What is a basic income for anyone who doesn't know?
So basic income is a regular monthly cash payment that everyone could receive, enough to cover basic needs, usually indexed to the what is the level of poverty in any particular region, to make sure everyone is above poverty so that we can avoid the worst impacts of poverty. A basic income guarantee in Canada is conceived of as a replacement and expansion of our social assistance system. In fact, it wouldn't be fair to really call it social assistance because everyone would have access to this money. So it would be more like a floor that we agree as a society that no one should fall under this floor. And with such a floor, it would not only replace and improve upon a lot of the problems that exist in the current welfare social assistance system, with people having to go through all kinds of obstacles to get the help they need, a lot of time-consuming obstacles, also work disincentives, where you lose a lot of the money when you work. With the basic income, it would also be expanded to help students, parents, entrepreneurs, anyone who's in transition and needs income support for a period of time, as well as actually complementing the income of working people, because 2/3 of people in poverty are working, and that represents a significant problem in our economy. So a basic guarantee would supplement working income to ensure no one is in poverty, working or not. And that's something that could be quite affordable in a country, especially a country like Canada, and would have dramatic impacts, positive impacts on the economy, on society, on reducing crime, improving mental health. Those are just some of the benefits. But at the end of the day, it's simply an income support system that any country could implement to establish a floor under which no citizen falls.
It sounds very humane to me. I've never understood why we haven't done something like this. Canada's had a couple of basic income pilots over the years, and they've been overwhelmingly successful. Why hasn't this idea been adopted?
Well, in the late 1960s, it actually passed in the U.S. House. In Congress, it almost passed. In the Senate, almost passed twice. It only failed because of a couple of votes from Democrats who thought it wasn't high enough as an income benefit. That was around the time in the 1970s where we had the Mincome experiment, where 5,000 people in Manitoba received a basic income guarantee, and we saw great benefits there. That was a time when poverty was actually part of the national agenda in both countries. It was a time when Martin Luther King was campaigning on eliminating poverty, on having a guaranteed annual income. And the headwinds sort of changed. Political winds changed. Unfortunately, after MLK died, we lost a huge voice in the movement, and things moved on. But I think we're talking about it again a lot now because we're seeing the economy not working for most people. You even have billionaire hedge fund managers like Ray Dalio saying capitalism is not working for most people. Inequality has reached levels that we haven't seen since the 1920s. People are working harder and longer than previous generations, getting less in return than their parents and grandparents. So, we're reaching a place of societal tension where people are looking for explanations, are looking for solutions. And basic income is a great solution to reduce a lot of the anxieties and a lot of the real physical hardships of poverty, as well as the anxieties of possibly falling into poverty. What if we had a society where no one could fail, where no one would ever have to worry about food? Like, how much more could we aspire to? So why hasn't it happened? It's just the usual left versus right, just political football. I think there's still a lot of misunderstandings about basic income, a lot of concerns about how much it'll cost, how to pay for it. Ultimately, a political party needs to run on it and win. And that's how we'll get a basic income. And that's been the focus of UBI Works over the last 4 years, is promoting basic income, engaging citizens to email their MPs, engaging in activism to help basic income stay loud on the agenda. Another reason why more people are talking about it now is because of the threat of job automation. We have seen automation decimate industries, decimate communities, people losing their jobs, having to survive on lower income jobs than they were trained for. And that's just going to get worse. We're literally at the precipice of an artificial intelligence revolution with projected 300 million jobs lost around the world within 10 years. And automation has already been impacting our economy for the last 40 years. That's why we have, in a sense, one of the primary drivers of a lot of the income inequality and low wages that we have is because the impacts of automation has had on our society. So these tensions are only going to increase. Like things are kind of getting worse with regards to the financial well-being of the average person who's entering the job market, trying to figure out what they'll do with their future. And we need solutions. It's no panacea, but it's part of a wider solution.
And a pretty simple one to implement, it sounds to me. One of the basic arguments to a basic income is this: the belief that people don't deserve what is commonly considered a handout. What do you say to that argument?
I say it's not a handout, it's a head start. Like we already have the concept of a head start in our economy, in our society. Why do we have free school? Why do we have free junior kindergarten through grade 12? Is that a handout or is it a head start? Why do we have free roads to drive on? Why do we have free public health care in this country? These are all things that enable, improve the quality of life, especially for working people, who otherwise would have to pay out of pocket, or business would have to pay for these things. If you look at in the US with their healthcare system, it's a huge drag on the economy that businesses have to pay for healthcare costs. So this is just the next evolution of any decent country's social safety net, or of its general social compacts, that we can live in a country where there is no poverty, where people can take time in transition to better themselves, to pursue a different kind of job. And we're not talking about luxury living. We're talking about a basic income that's set to the poverty line, where it would still be not easy to live as an individual on basic incomes. Like maybe it's like $1,800 a month, or for couples, $26,000, $27,000 a year. It's not easy. That's what's often being proposed in Canada, or maybe $2,000 a month. But it's enough to avoid the worst impacts of poverty and allow people to reorganize their lives around this income security and find a way out and find a way to better themselves.
Do you not think if we're looking after our vulnerable that our communities is strengthened?
Absolutely. I think it reflects on us as a society, it reflects on our well-being, both those who are giving, knowing that we have such a great society where we've eliminated poverty. I think we'd have probably 80% or 100% less homelessness if we had a basic income. One of the main issues with homelessness is people just don't have long-term income security. You may get a temporary handout, but that's not enough for you to be able to change your circumstances. It's not enough to exit a depression. If you don't know where your check will come in 6 months or in 1 year, it's not enough to start a business. It's not enough to decide to go back to school. We need long-term income security for people to make long-term decisions that they can trust, that they can rely on. And that's one of the big differences. That's why we've seen even when we've had 2-year or 3-year basic income experiments around the world, those were just long enough for people to try and do something different. Even during COVID, where people only had several months of income security with CERB, there were many stories of people who took a course, people who started a business, people who quit their jobs and found better jobs because they knew that they could actually survive for a few months while they look for something better. So ultimately, I think we can have a society where long-term income security is just part of the normal fabric of what it means to be a Canadian, just like it's normal to go to high school or go to the doctor and you don't question, why do I get the money and is this fair and where does it come from?
Good point. I want to turn it around for a minute and argue who exactly would benefit from this. Dissenters often argue that it's lazy people or those who are making bad life choices. I don't think that's it at all.
Absolutely not. A lot of people don't know about this, may not expect it, but I'm a business owner. I run a software developer education company. UBI Works is something I've been doing as a form of philanthropy, promoting basic income. I also organized 150 Canadian business owners to sign a petition asking for a basic income. And the reasons for this were very diverse. Many of them said, well, I had a form of income support when I was starting my business. And a lot of people have become multimillionaires now. A lot of them said it's because it shouldn't only be the children of wealthy white people who they saw in school that have a chance to start a business. Like this should be equality of opportunity where anyone has a chance to better themselves and go back to school. Mark Carney, the Bank of Canada governor and Bank of England governor, did a really interesting talk about the fourth industrial revolution, where he said that we need an income support system that would allow a 40-year-old to go back to university to retrain, because the job market is changing so fast. Like right now, some of your listeners have tried ChatGPT. If you haven't, try it after this call. You'll love it. It's artificial intelligence that's free. You can ask it questions. It can tell you everything from how to make a souffle to write a legal contract for you in 5 seconds. And it's extraordinary technology that is disrupting the labor market as we speak, and it's only a few months old. So basic income is for people who have lost their jobs to automation, which included my father and uncle, who in the early 2000s, they were proudly in Ontario's automotive manufacturing sector, doing tool and die design and drafting. And when China entered the global market competing on parts, then the market here responded by automating. I don't blame China for that. Research has shown that 4/5 of the job losses in manufacturing in North America is due to automation. At any time of crisis, people respond with the automation that's around them. We've seen that during COVID with rapid improvements in our technological automation. So what happens is people lose their careers because it's no longer feasible to be a tool and die designer when software has come out that can do the job, where a less skilled and lower income person can do the job. Right now there are robotic arms that cost less than a minimum wage worker that can do all kinds of repeatable tasks. So what's going to happen to people who were in those types of roles? Already, if you walk into a McDonald's, you see a whole bunch of kiosks, like giant iPads on the wall you can order from, instead of going up to a cashier. So it's everywhere.
Wow.
So one of the main things we have to combat if we want to promote basic income is it's not only for people who can't work, who are on social assistance or on disability. I mean, those people do absolutely need support. It's for mothers. It's for students. It's for entrepreneurs. It's for people whose jobs are disrupted. It's for people in the gig economy who have no security, don't have the benefits of people in a full-time job, because a lot of those jobs have been eliminated. We are in 30 years of decimation of middle-class jobs, where the standard, work for one company for your whole career, get benefits and retire. It doesn't exist anymore. The middle class itself has been shrinking. We're moving towards what's called an hourglass economy. If you imagine the shape of an hourglass, we're growing jobs at the bottom and the top, and the middle is shrinking. And that's a big problem, because the middle is supposed to be a ladder up. The middle is a foundation of democracy, to have a strong middle class that can vote in the interests of what's best for people. Otherwise, you have power imbalances. So if we're going to have a permanent low-income working class and a high-income working class, I think it's only fair that we have a basic income guarantee to complement the incomes of people on lower incomes to maintain quality of life, to maintain income security. Because, how is it fair if society has reached a level of technological automation where there's just not enough good jobs? So why should we be forced into permanent servitude and permanent precarity for their whole lives when they're willing to work? Like, this just doesn't make any sense. So I say basic income is for working people. It's for anyone really who wants to better themselves, or it's how we have to evolve to survive this time of rapid automation. In fact, we always needed it. We needed it hundreds of years ago at the first industrial revolution, where extraordinary amounts of despair and suffering happened. And a lot of people will say on the automation argument that we always eventually create jobs. But it's been shown through the research that the benefits of an industrial revolution don't come until literally generations later. They don't come to the current generation. People whose jobs are lost when automation happens now don't just find a new job the next day. If they do, it's usually for lower income than they made before. So generations later, we might have more jobs created and better pay, but that's only because labor movements organize to demand more. It doesn't just happen magically. So basic income is something that we should be demanding now for any modern labor movement, to have basic security for every individual.
And I think, again, our community is much better, much stronger if everybody's contributing. And people want to contribute. I don't think I've met many people who just want to sit home and watch soap operas all day. The average person really wants to be involved.
I mean, there's no evidence from any of the basic income pilots. There have been more than 50, maybe close to 100 of them over the last 50 years. Over 119,000 people received basic incomes in these experiments with no really measurable drop in hours worked. So this idea that people just not work just doesn't make any sense. I mean,
but
sure,
we did hear that during the COVID. These people are getting served. They're doing it because they don't want to work. I don't think that's the case.
There are anecdotal stories about that. Maybe those people had really shitty jobs, and CERB allowed them a chance to find a better job. In reality, the hospitality industry is the lowest paid, least benefits industry there is. And what happened was that a lot of the hospitality industry had to respond with better pay and better benefits.
Yes.
And that's a good thing.
Yes.
That's a thing that basic income provides. Is like nobody wants to live on a poverty income, which is the basic income. Everybody wants a bit more. But what it does do is give workers bargaining power, because they know that they can actually ask for more, or they can leave and find a better job. So we respond with better pay, and that's better for everyone. It's crazy. It's a drain on society that 2/3 of people in poverty are already working. So basic income would ensure that actually work pays enough to be exciting and interesting for people to want to work, and not be forced to work. And that would be a much better society. Not that people wouldn't work, but again, you can actually work and keep your basic income. That's why it's not, depending on your income level, that's why it's not a disincentive to work, because you get to keep it in parts. In fact, funny thing is that during the pandemic, the conservatives were arguing to change how CERB worked so that you do get to keep part of it for a while after you work. So they're literally arguing to make it like a basic income, versus the way the liberals have set it up. It was more like welfare, in that you lose it 100% if you work. So there was a clear disincentive to work. Like, why would you go back to work if you're making the same or less, and you have to lose all of it?
Yeah.
Now, there were a lot of stories of people who actually did go back to work anyway, even just because they wanted to help their boss, they wanted to help their job. So, there's stories in every direction. But the fact is, statistically speaking, we did not see a labor shortage due to the income supports during the pandemic. It just didn't happen. Like we saw a quick bounce back of employment. People did go back to work. And some people used that time when they did get served to actually find better jobs and go back to school.
A recent study by the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis offered a first ever look at the economic impacts of a national basic income on the BC economy. And according to this study, a basic income would create jobs, raise wages, and support businesses while ending poverty. I want to know a little bit about this study.
Sure. Yeah. So we commissioned the study from an independent analyst firm that works for government and private industry. They're called the Canadian Centre of Economics Analysis. And they ran their numbers because they have a econometrics model. They simulated what would happen in a country that has a basic income, because government turns to them to make projections, to make policy decisions. And they found that if we implemented a $2,000 basic income guarantee, which would be very appropriate right now, it would stimulate the Canadian economy. It could grow Canada's economy by $80 billion in time, create nearly 600,000 jobs in the long term, and within 3 years, create 300,000 jobs for that particular scheme. There's two schemes evaluated in the program. One was a little more aggressive, but this more realistic one would do that. Long term, we would have an economy that's $80 billion a year bigger, which is greater than Canada's tourism and hospitality industry combined. It found that it would stimulate business, because all the spending from the bottom up would actually drive private capital investment, because businesses make investments based on projections of future revenues. They can project future revenues, they can make more investments. It would drive greater profits, it would drive greater wages. They saw $32 billion a year would go back more through wages because of this overall increase in economic stimulus on the economy. That's greater than the profits of Canada's largest 3 banks, just for comparison.
Wow.
And it would be a self-sustaining investment. It would grow the economy by more than it costs. Let me repeat that again. It would grow the economy by more than it costs, generating $22 billion a year in new government revenues because of this increased stimulus, grows the economy and increases tax payments. That doesn't mean it would pay for itself, but it would grow the economy more than it costs, which could provide enough of a justification beyond the social reasons for it, which are obviously well understood, that it's just good for the economy. While it would also lift 3.2 million families out of poverty and give a raise to most Canadians who are on low income, who desperately need a raise, desperately need a complement to their working income so they can make ends meet. So far, 34,000 people have signed this petition telling Trudeau that basic income would grow the economy. So if you go to ubiworks.ca/grow economy, you can sign this petition as well and share this idea that basic income would grow the economy. The report included a breakdown on UBI Works' website. If you click on the UBI in your region, it shows how it could grow the economy in British Columbia. So the breakdown there is growing the economy by $16 billion a year, adding 118,000 jobs. Because again, like businesses hire and invest when they can predict future revenue growth.
Yes.
So that's really what basic income does. It just literally creates a greater flow of income through the economy where it's most needed, where people who have the least are the most vulnerable. are most vulnerable, the people on the lowest income in this country, are the most untapped source of capital, most untapped investment we have. Because if people can at least spend to the point of meeting basic needs, we can have a better economy that works for everybody.
Yeah. Now, there was a statistic in there that really disturbs me. You said 3.2 million people would be pulled out of poverty. That we have 3.2 million people in poverty is very disturbing.
Yeah, it is. Families. So it's more than 3.2 million people, 3.2 million
Holy.
families. That would include 129,000 single parent families, 85% of which are female led, would be lifted out of poverty, and 2.3 million families in the lowest income bracket, that's people who are making less than 10,000 a year, would see their income at least triple from such a basic income. And that would just be a much better place to live.
Wouldn't it though? And I remember years ago somebody saying to me, we dismiss people who are vulnerable as if they're all the lowest of the low and they're not going to be able to contribute. But that's an error on our thinking, because there could be some very smart people in there who just haven't got a chance to get an education, or they can't get a job where they can use their skills. There could be some fabulous musicians and performance artists, and what a community we could have, and we're not tapping into that resource at all.
A lot of people have great ideas, but they don't have the means to pursue them. They don't have the means to go to school to train for them, for these ideas. They don't have the capital to start it. That's why a lot of the Silicon Valley types say that basic income is like seed funding for the people. It's funding everyone's dreams, everyone's investments to a small extent, right? It just means that you can not be in poverty and actually build your idea and try and make something happen. That's very compelling. Like, how many more businesses would we have? How many more local bakeries would we have? How many more small businesses would we have? And today's existing small businesses, how much more security would they have, knowing that there are more customers can come in to buy from them? It's something that we just absolutely need.
Now, there still are some objections to this idea. I'd like to hear what those are.
Well, I mean, usually the first one is people won't work. I think we've already discussed that on the
Yes.
show. The statistics just don't show that people won't work. The statistics also don't show that people spend it on drugs and alcohol. We've actually seen a reduction in vice spending in many of these experiments. I mean, we haven't seen an increase in any of them, but the reason why we see a reduction in them is because people have hope. When you have long-term security, you get off these things that provide you temporary comforts, because you know that you can actually do something with your life. The Canada Child Benefit is a form of basic income in this country. We already spend more than $20 billion a year on it. It keeps like millions of children out of poverty. And for the most part, the money from the Canada Child Benefit, which is pretty unconditional cash support, it's not enough to end poverty, but it's lifted. Canada's the only country in the G7 that has seen was it a 20% or 30% reduction in poverty in the years after the Canada Child Benefit was increased after Trudeau came into power. And much of the increase in that cash support was actually for lower income working people, because people who were on no income had a very small boost versus the previous child credit that existed. It was working lower income people who exited poverty with the Canada Child Benefit. We didn't see a reduction in work. And we saw that the majority of that income was going to buy things for their children, to buy better food, buy better clothing. And so there's literally no evidence that of vice spending increasing. And the other big one is that it's just unaffordable. It'll cost too much. Well, that's why at UBI Works, we've been really focusing on this issue just to resolve that. In fact, there's many ways to think about how much it costs. Now, while we don't promote this idea, but just to get a sense of it, if we increase the GST by 5%, it would pay for a basic income in this country. If we increased it by only 3% and did very aggressive replacements of existing income support programs, that might cause its own controversies, which a lot of conservatives would love to see that. Let's eliminate the social welfare state and just give everyone a basic income. Instead, cash support, it could only cost as low as 3%. Just to give people a sense of what it would cost. I mean, prices have been going up and down forever, but would it be such a big deal if we paid 5% more when we buy things, but there's no poverty? But now, I personally think a lot of that idea would be attacked, though, because it would cost working and middle-class people. A program that we put forward on UBI Works would be that we could actually pay for it. It would cost $51 billion in the net for a simple basic income that would be at the poverty line or near the poverty line, of around $18,000 an individual, and I believe it was $27,000 for a couple. That would cost $51 billion after also factoring in replacing similar cash support programs. And that's not a lot. I mean, that's only like 8% of all government revenues across the country, across all levels of government. So if you think about just 8% more spending could eliminate poverty. But we could pay for it through contributions from the financial sector, more taxes on banks and insurance companies, on the transactions in large wealth portfolios. It can be paid for by reducing income tax benefits that are enjoyed by the wealthiest and by large corporations. Taxes that don't necessarily inhibit productivity, that's a key thing, and wouldn't materially impact the vast majority of earners. Like, we put a task to ourselves is, how can we pay for basic income? How can we fill the gap of $51 billion in a way that would not affect anyone who makes under 100,000 or even under 150,000? And we found a way. It's a whole bunch of tax policies. You can see it at ubiworks.ca/how-to-pay, where we make the case that it doesn't have to cost working people. Because in Canada, 2/3 of people say we want a basic income, but only 1/3 would be willing to pay more tax for it. So this issue of who pays and how it's paid is really important. Some party has to run it, make an eloquent case that we can pay for it and it won't cost you, the working person, anymore, or a retiree won't cost you anymore.
So I want to turn now to your more recent initiative called Commonwealth. On that website, you explain the difference between basic income, which alleviates poverty, and Commonwealth, which proposes a better way to share and preserve the Earth's riches. You're offering ways to find the funding for this that won't negatively affect anyone, like you just said. And I love that. I think that's really intelligent.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'd like to introduce a new project called Commonwealth. It's not about basic income, although it does pay dividends. So this is actually looking at what's actually got society into the place that it's in now. Like, why do we have poverty in the first place? And a lot of it is our relationship to the value of land and the environment. A lot of it has to do with the unearned income, what economists call economic rents, that exist in societies, especially as monopolies form, as oligopolies form. I would argue that we actually don't live in capitalism right now. We live in some variant of old feudalism, where the old landed gentry, the old nobility class, are still basically the power holders. And we just found a way to share more in land ownership and property ownership with more and more people. So I look at a lot of the problems we have with the environment is that we have the privatization of the full profits that come from extraction of the environment, of minerals, of oil. We treat the value of the environment as a private good, when the value of the environment should really be a common good, something that benefits everyone, because no one put oil in the ground. The value of increase of land is not created by an individual's efforts. It doesn't create more productivity when land values go up. Land values go up because of overall productivity. And that makes life more expensive for everyone, for students, for the next generation, for people's kids. The cost of housing is the number one cost in anyone's life. So Commonwealth talks about, how can we create a world where we have some wealth in common, held in common, so that everyone has a net worth that can pay dividends, so that we're taxing things that make life more expensive so that things stay cheap. So we're talking about, how do we find a way that everyone benefits as society progresses while things don't get too expensive? And that, I think, is a fundamental thing we have to tackle to reach a decent society. And in our exploration, it's not communism and it's not socialism. It's recognizing that in a market economy, there is a lot of unearned income that does not increase productivity, and that unearned income really should belong to everyone as a common good. So we argue for two things. We argue for a land value tax that taxes the rental value of land, which has been argued for since the beginning of economics, as a very capitalist idea, in fact, as a very free market idea. And we also argue for a national investment fund, like an investment portfolio that everyone owns a small share of, that can pay everyone some dividends. And this is not a controversial idea. There are over 60 investment funds around the world that already help people financially through reduced taxes, primarily. But in a couple of jurisdictions, in Alaska and in Nevis, St. Kitts, in the Caribbean, they have these portfolios that actually pay people dividends. It's like a pension fund, except it's for everybody. And the proceeds from super profits, from environmental extraction, from pollution, from minerals, could go into this fund. Non-renewables, profits from non-renewables could go into this fund, the unearned portion anyway. And that could actually buy stocks and bonds, and everyone could buy some stocks and bonds. It could own some stocks and bonds that pay them dividends, a form of a property rights. So, Sam Altman, who's the president of OpenAI, which is driving artificial intelligence innovation right now, argues that this future we're moving into of a lot of automation of work, really value won't be created by labor. It'll be in companies and it'll be in land, because these two things go up in value as society progresses. So we need to find a way to share in some of the value of land and create some sort of way to create ownership of stocks and bonds that can pay everyone dividends. So a land value tax specifically would be a way to fund government as opposed to income taxes, as well as pay dividends to people. If we all had dividends coming to us from the value of land and also from the value held in these investment funds, and we could reduce or eliminate income taxes for the bottom 70% of those with the least wealth, we will see a tremendous shift, a much better society where everyone has income security, has some wealth. We've addressed extreme wealth inequality. Well, we haven't actually changed the dynamics that make capitalism work, which is that the incentive to profit, the incentive to innovate would still be there. So Commonwealth fundamentally argues that there is a category of profit that has been known for centuries as something that is unearned by the individual, that if we want to have a decent society that moves towards something that we'd all love to live in, that preserves the environment, that doesn't have extreme wealth inequality, then we need a bit of wealth held in common. And having a stock portfolio and some of the value of land diverted towards something that we share through reduced income taxes and through dividends would be a way to achieve that.
If there's a listener-supported radio station, it means that people can get daily, every day, a different way of looking at the world, not just what the corporate media want you to see, but a different picture, different understanding, but a different picture, a different understanding. Not only can you hear it, but you can participate in it. You can add your own thoughts, and you can learn something, and so on. Well, that's the way. People become human. That's the way you become human participants in a social and political system.
You've got your hand in the cookie jar on CICK 93.9 FM in Smithers, BC, and that's a very good thing. I'm your host, Christine Bruce. Floyd Marinescu of the project UBI Works has been explaining how a universal basic income has been proven to work for everyone, and that the economic impacts of a basic income would create jobs, raise wages, and end poverty. Now he turns to his latest project, Commonwealth, which offers a couple of sensible suggestions to eliminate personal income taxes while preserving the environment. There's a couple of figures on your website that I'd like to understand where you get these figures. You say that we could pay every Canadian up to $16,000 a year in Commonwealth dividends, or we could use the money to eliminate all personal income taxes, as you said, and then still have enough to pay every Canadian $5,000 a year while making homes more affordable and conserving the environment, which I really appreciate. Where did you get these figures?
Well, we did some research to look into quantifying what is the total value of the economic rents which is the unearned income that comes from the environment in Canada, from land, from resources, from oil, from minerals, from forestry and fishery. And the total amount per year, with regards to land, people have been more familiar with it. It's part of the average growth in land value around the country. It would factor into that. If you were to tax this rental value of land, I think it came about to a 6% tax on the value of land would be considered a rental value of land. If we tax that, we could raise $420 billion a year. So if you take $420 billion a year, what do you do with it? Well, we could eliminate income taxes altogether because, it's the same people paying it either way, which means if we eliminate income taxes, it means that paying for a tax on the value of land you have, or a tax that covers the landlord's rent they receive on the land portion of it. So it wouldn't cost tenants more. It's the landlord that would be taxed on the land portion of the rent they receive. Well, that's how we contribute to government. So we wouldn't need to have income taxes if we're paying tax for how much land we use. So such a tax would encourage conservation. It would encourage more city density, which is a good thing, less urban sprawl.
Yes.
Maintaining more of our greenlands. And it's not some socialist thing because, it's more socialist to pay income tax than it is to pay tax for how much you use. Paying tax for what you use is more of a libertarian idea. Like you use it, you pay for it. It's really that simple. So if we paid for what we use out of the environment, well, we'd then be conserving the environment. And it would actually be much, much better for how the housing market works. This is a key point, is that regardless of any ideas one may have, romantic ideas about holding wealth in common, it's just practical because right now, the way the housing market works, it's mostly benefiting the wealthy. And it's come to the expense of future generations. No people can't afford to own homes anymore. It takes like 20 years to save up for a down payment. The reason for that, the fundamental reason, is actually not supply. The supply narrative is being pushed because it's easy to understand, and it benefits the existing industries. We could double the supply in this country within 10 years, and I don't think prices will go down. In fact, some research has shown that you build a skyscraper in an area and rent only is down by like 0.5% 2 years later. So how much impact will more supply have? You might slow down the growth. So the fundamental problem is that we treat housing as a retirement vehicle, as a form of a wealth creation tool. And the part that comes from land is fundamentally unearned. So we're creating a carrot, we're chasing it, we're trying to take as much of it as we can. We're bidding up prices because of this notion of housing as a bank account. And that's actually what is making housing more expensive. A third of property across the country in many major areas is owned by investors, not by families who just want to live there. Right. So this investor sentiment, this investor motivation to treat land as a stock market, as a casino, is what's pushing the prices up. And we've seen it during the pandemic. Like, prices went up 50%. Our population didn't grow by 50%. So what drove that price increase? It was a speculative fever. And I don't even like the word speculation, because there's no speculation here. We all know the housing prices always go up. So everybody wants to get in on the game. And those who have more money end up buying more than others who don't, and end up making life more expensive for everybody. So if we implement a land value tax at the full rental value of land, and instead we lower income taxes and pay back everyone dividends and rebates, what we're doing is rewarding working people, who are contributing the most, because your income from your work will be more valuable. Your income from your pension will be more valuable because it's not taxed or taxed less. And instead, a house will be less valuable, because these incentives that are driving up its price would disappear, because we would be taxing the full rental value of land, and there'd be no incentive to bid up prices, and which you would have a permanently low cost housing market, maybe like it was in the 70s and 80s, where you could buy a house with only like anywhere from 1 to 5 years of your total income would pay for the cost of a house. Those were good times.
Yes.
We could have those times again if we tax income less and tax land more to change these dynamics. Now, a lot of people get confused. They think, well, does that mean I don't own anything? Like, no, absolutely not. You own your house. We're just paying a tax on the value of the land. The current system actually penalizes people who want to improve the quality of their housing. If they want to build on their lot and add more houses to it, they have to pay more property tax as a result of it. So we were penalizing what we want, which is more building, instead of penalizing not building. So a land value tax penalizes underutilization of land. If we had a full land value tax, there wouldn't be so many empty lots in downtown city centers. There wouldn't be so many underutilized land of houses near subway lines. There should really be skyscrapers near subway lines where people need to use them. A land tax encourages all that. So it's a grand bargain where we can shift taxes onto unproductive profit creation and relieve the burden on productive income and profit creation, while being able to fund like a UBI. So the $16,000 a year is what would happen if we literally had a full land value tax on the rental value of land, if we fully took on the oil and the mineral industry and captured the unearned income involved in those industries, and just understand what that means, unearned income, because this was all confusing for me when I got started too. If you take a barrel of oil and it's priced, let's say $100, well, maybe it only costs like $50 to pay the labor involved in extracting that oil and to give the investors back a fair return on their money, meaning like 10, 20% return, a competitive return on their money, a fair return. That part of the other $50 on that hypothetical barrel of oil is the underlying value created by nature itself. Just the fact that the oil itself is valuable to other people who need to buy it. And that value is said by economists to be unearned. It comes only from the right of possession. It's just because the oil company possessed the patch doesn't mean they should keep all the profit from the full oil, because they're not investing enough to earn it. So if you give capital a fair return and labor a fair return, then the rest of it should be owned by the community, because no one put the oil in the ground. That's just like nobody owns the air. So if we pollute the air, someone should pay for it, because if someone doesn't pay for it, then we're just contributing to private companies' profits who are taking away our property. If the air is our common property, shouldn't we be compensated if someone is ruining it? If someone dumps garbage in your front lawn, shouldn't they pay to remove it? So that's the situation we're in, is that a lot of the value of nature, it's been known since the times of Adam Smith, who wrote the book, The Wealth of Nations. He said that often 20% to like more than 1/3 of the value of everything produced is not created by man. It's not created by private incentives. It just comes from the value of nature inherent to nature itself. So that value should be considered a common good, a common property that could be used to benefit us all through low taxes and through receiving dividends. So in Norway, they collect nearly 80% of the value of the oil extraction in Norway, and that through private oil companies. And where does that money go? It goes into a giant fund where they buy stocks and bonds. They have over $1 trillion in that fund. And that fund is saving Norwegian people taxes because it's paying for public services. And in Texas, they have large land trusts, like a lot of publicly owned land, the value of which the leased out has created money that has gone into a fund that bought stocks and bonds. And that fund is the reason why Texas has no income taxes. So it's not that they're like smart conservatives who are good at balancing the budget, is that they have common wealth. They have some value of nature that's being held back and held in a fund so that we don't have to have income taxes in Texas. And then in Alaska, they chose to do that with oil as well, not as good as Norway did, but they still captured a fair amount of the oil profits, and they put that into a fund. They bought stocks and bonds and all kinds of instruments. And everyone in Alaska gets nearly $2,000 a year as a check, just because they're co-owners of Alaska. Like, we can do that in this country. So that research we showed that in Canada, there's $420 billion a year in value that's arising from nature and that is created by the community, not by an individual. We could use that to benefit ourselves without harming economic productivity as part of some new grand bargain that helps the environment and helps our individual situation. So the options we showed on our website, these are all hypothetical, right? So at this point, we're just trying to create a conversation amongst people to understand what's going on. So we can solve our housing market incentives and speculation in the housing market. And in doing so, this money from land value tax and from resources, what do you do with it? Well, we could eliminate all income taxes and then still have $5,000 a month left to pay people rebates, pay people dividends, or we could just give everyone a check directly with the full amount. It would be $16,000 a person. It's just a way to understand just how much of this unearned profit exists in the country. Or something in the middle, which is really what we propose, is that we could use half of it to reduce income taxes from the bottom up, so have a 0% tax bracket that goes anywhere from $70,000 of earned income to $110,000 of earned income. That means nobody would pay any tax off their pensions or off their work if they make $70,000 or less. Taxes would start after $70,000 or after $111,000, depending on how much of this tax policy we could achieve in this country. So everybody would pay less tax on that first amount of income, and we could still get rebates back of nearly $10,000 a year. So, why not? I think that would be a much better society. The economy would work better. Housing would be cheaper. We'd have more money and lower costs. That's really ultimately what we need.
It sounds really wonderful. You said you're starting conversations. So I want to turn to the national video calls that you've been hosting, calls to kickstart the Commonwealth Project. And the first one was on March 23rd. I attended and I thought it was remarkable. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, it felt good. It was the first time we came out in public and started talking about some of these issues. I just wanted to introduce the concepts to people like yourself who came. And, we're really at the beginning of this idea, really early on. I was amazed that after my brief presentation introducing these concepts, people stayed for another hour and a half. Yeah, mostly asking questions about how land value tax would work and how the housing market would be improved if we had such a tax, which is great. I mean, I think we need it. I just don't see any path to a future of permanently lower cost living and greater sharing of progress in society, greater incomes for everyone that does not include full land value tax. There's no way there, because we're literally digging our own hole by making housing more expensive through our own bidding behavior. We're doing it to ourselves, and we got to stop the game. There's no other way. I was very excited about the call, about the interest. A lot of people said they wanted to get involved. Right now, we're still trying to figure out how people can get involved, what we can do. And it's probably just to be a lot of conversations. I want to deliver versions of that presentation around Canada. If any listeners here have access to schools or teachers or community groups that want to hear about it, I'd love to come talk about it and start to share these ideas. We're really in an interesting time right now with the housing market being so expensive, so much pain for new families who are spending 30, 40, even 50% of their total incomes on housing. I saw a report that in the major city centers, it's nearly 80% of people's incomes are going towards rent. It's crazy. It should be less than 20%. Should be going towards cost of living. That's the good life that we deserve. And so that plus artificial intelligence disrupting labor market so quickly. It's going to be coming in the next few years. Like, we need to have the right answers on the table. And I think creating Commonwealth by creating an investment fund that everyone can benefit from, this growth in artificial intelligence and growth in land values that's created by society and technology while reducing costs, is a very sound idea that I think should be on the table. So I want to do whatever I can in the coming years to get the idea out, like being on programs like yours, Christine. Like, thank you very much. Yeah.
The next Commonwealth video call is scheduled for this week on April 20th. So tell us about the speaker and what you hope to accomplish.
Yes, first of all, anyone who's interested, if you go to commonwealth.ca/community call, you'll find the Zoom registration link there. So Martin Adams is a Canadian who lives in BC, who's written a great book called Land. It's a very accessible book. The language is very simple. It's a great contribution to this conversation, because many books have been written by economists over the last few hundred years on this topic that are very dense. So Martin Adams will be doing a talk explaining how our relationship to land and the economic value of land, rather, is what's making life more expensive. It's causing a lot of problems in society, and how treating the value of land as something held in common, not land itself. We're not talking about changing private property at all. We're literally just talking about a form of property tax, a land value tax, that all economists think is a good idea, and how that could actually really turn things around, and whether it would improve housing market incentives. So this guy's a domain expert, even more so than I have. He's written a book on it. And I'm very excited to hear what he has to say, and to see the conversations in the call, and where that leads us. You know, we hope to create a movement of people who see that we should have a land value tax in this country, and we should find a way to share in a lot of the gains from technology through an investment fund. Yeah, that'll be a great call. So we want to have speakers like that who are talking about various types of Commonwealth over the next year. And but I would say Martin is one of the newer contemporary voices in the movement, especially from a Canadian perspective.
Good to hear. I want to end with something that very local that's happened recently. Last month, our local town council held a public input opportunity to discuss a change to the Parks and Open Spaces bylaw number 1951, which would allow our homeless, of whom there are many suddenly, to set up temporary overnight shelters in public spaces. And there was a huge stack of letters written in response. And there was a huge influx of people to that meeting. And at the public forum, where there was standing room only, I heard business people suggest that we erect walls to keep the homeless contained. I heard seniors say we should refuse Narcan to those with drug addictions so they don't survive an overdose. I heard average citizens blame the vulnerable for vandalism and theft and everything that's bad in our town as if they were the only ones responsible. What I heard was fear. Fear always brings out the worst in people. And yet, I believe that if the vulnerable had a safe place to live and even a modest income, they'd have hope. And what you're offering with basic income and things like a land value tax is hope. Everyone could afford to buy the basics from our local shops. They'd have more time and energy to engage as citizens. I asked earlier who the basic income is for, and you mentioned a lot of average citizens. Neither one of us mentioned the homeless, those with addictions or trauma, those without hope. But you're offering hope, and that hope would affect all people. The vulnerable, seniors, artists, musicians, people looking after their elderly parents and children, our local business owners and shopkeepers. It would affect everyone in my town in positive ways. Do you agree with me?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, an interesting take on homelessness and land. I mean, rising land values is what's driving homelessness. I mean, yes, of course, there are individual situations, mental health issues, but overall, the research shows that it's rising cost of housing, which means rising land values. What happens is a kind of a musical chairs, where wealthier people are buying homes that used to be owned by middle class. Middle class people are buying homes that used to be owned by lower income people. Lower income people are being pushed into even smaller accommodations, and many people are being pushed onto the street. So where are people going to go? You know, people who want to work can't afford to live where they work, and everyone is suffering from this dynamic of rising cost of land. So what do? Really simply, you tax what you want less of, and you don't tax what you want more of. We want more productivity, we want more jobs. We can shift our tax base off of that. We want land values to be down, so we should be taxing land. There are many people who, in the movement, take a very historical view on this, that land used to be free and open. And so everyone had a right to something called the commons. The commons was just common, open wilderness that people could farm on, they could hunt on, they could set up a tent on. So what we're seeing I like to think when I see homeless encampments is just people using the commons the way they always did. But because we created a private property system, people got kicked out and had to move further and further away, get jobs in order to survive. But some people can't get jobs in order to survive when housing costs are just too high. Like, where are they going to go? Like, if they move 2 hours away where they might be able to afford a place to live, well, there's no jobs there, or not the job they're trained for. So we need to find a way to to better share in the land that's under our feet if we want to have less homelessness. So if we found a way to share in rising land values in a way that keeps the cost of land down and encourages more construction and more new housing, that's the way we could do that and pay a UBI and also have less taxes for those with the least wealth and have a much better society. So yeah, I think it would solve a lot of these issues that frankly were created, hundreds of years ago with the dawn of the first industrial revolution. We always needed this. That's why some of the earliest thinkers like Thomas Paine and some of the earliest economists like John Stuart Mill argued that, yeah, when you privatize land, you create poverty. Really that simple, because people can no longer be self-reliant. So in a modern system where all land is owned, and I'm not arguing against private land ownership, it's been shown to be one of the key factors of driving increased productivity. But the value of land itself is something that should be shared, not what people make on top of it that belongs to the individual. So we would really not have poverty and all this homelessness if the land people need to exist, we found a better way to share its value.
Floyd, this all makes so much sense, and it's very compassionate and humane. I really appreciate your thinking, and I'm really looking forward to the next meeting.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I hope you do convince lots of people to get on board with this, because I think what we need as a society is hope.
It's so interesting because there's just so many ways to think about it. I often at a loss of what's the right entry point, because I'm a former software engineer. So I like to think about the robots are coming. Well, if the robots are coming, well, what's your share? Shouldn't we be asking if jobs aren't working anymore because of all this automation, then how can we still expect that jobs are the main way that people should benefit as society progresses? Now, because it's not, and it hasn't been for a while, right? We exist in this world where we expect that everyone gets what they deserve. But if a job is the only means in which you get what you deserve and jobs aren't working anymore, then what happens with that story, with that belief that we hold on to? So I think I look into the origins of economics and we find that, well, no, there's always something that we should have held in common from the very beginning, that if we did that, we would have a society where we all benefit when the robots are coming, where all of us have more time and higher income and to do things. I mean, there's that entry point. There's the technology entry point. I want to get to a Star Trek future where people can pursue careers of their own interest. I don't see how we're going to get there if we're fighting over who owns natural resources. If we're fighting over who owns what we need to survive, and one person can take it and then sell it back to you, so you have to work harder in order to earn it. We're never going to get to a Star Trek future. So, I think we should have a society where we share what is created by nature, by the community, but we keep what we earn individually is the way we can get there. So there's that entry point. There's the housing entry point. The rent is just too high, and a land value tax, which is a way to share in the value of land, would completely transform how the housing market works. It would make it work better. We'd have more construction. We'd have lower costs. So practically speaking, with no moral element at all, just pure practical economics, that land value tax makes a lot of sense. But it ultimately embodies deep spiritual truths that no one can own the land. It's embodied in how the tax works. But yet we get to keep, private title, but no one can profit from its value. Even all the spirituality aside, it just works. It just keeps prices low. There's that entry point. Then there's the wealth inequality entry point. Really, everyone should have a share of so much of what's being created, which is not due to individuals' efforts. It's due to many generations of scientific and contribution and public investments. They say that we socialize the risk and privatize the rewards. A lot of research that has gone into what makes an iPhone was created by government investments, but yet Apple gets to keep hundreds of billions of dollars in its war chest off of a lot of what is public investments. Why is our Rogers and Bell cell phone bills so high? They're using public airwaves for our cell phone bills, but the public spectrum doesn't belong to anybody. It's like air. It's like you breathe it. It's like water that you drink. So the bill shouldn't be that high. So economists would argue that if a Rogers bill is 50% more expensive than it costs someone in the US, then 50% of that income is unearned by Rogers' part. So that's considered a rent because they possess an oligopoly. They possess a market restricting position, market power, and to some extent because they've licensed out public airwaves, the electromagnetic spectrum, and they're not passing on cost savings to us. So what if we all own part of 30% of Rogers and Bell was owned in a public fund that everyone has a piece of as a form of compensation? It's a crazy idea, right? But if they don't lower the costs, then we should get what's owed to us. There's just so many ways to do
that too, because the internet is ubiquitous now. So why are we paying so much for it? It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's market power, and to some extent, it's use of common resources, the electromagnetic spectrum, that maybe we should change how we charge for that.
Yeah. Yeah, there are so many things that are broken, but could be fixed fairly easily. It's just having a will to do it.
Yeah, so the ideas we're proposing they're really quite simple. I mean, we can have private wealth, we can have public wealth, that's government-owned properties and roads and stuff, but we also need to have commonwealth. That's a form of wealth that everyone has a share of that increases in value as society progresses. And I think that's something that's deeply meaningful to me. And if we had commonwealth, I think costs would be very low. We'd still have innovation, we'd still have free markets. It would just be a better society. And we wouldn't have a basic income viewed as a income redistribution, viewed as a form of charity. We would have commonwealth and dividends from commonwealth viewed as a right of property, something that we build and own together. And that's very compelling to me. And a lot of thinkers in the basic income movement come from that point of view or have moved into that point of view, that it's better to just hold some wealth in common like they do in Alaska, in Norway, in Texas, that can benefit people financially, as opposed to just taxing the rich to pay the poor. It's just a whole different mindset.
Yeah, it's very sensible. Thank you, Floyd. Thank you. I look forward to the next conversation.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, the goal of all this is to create a movement that normal people want to be part of.
Yeah.
That's where else to start.
Yeah.
Never felt so clearly as when I'm floating in Lake Erie. Closest I've been to flying is the furthest I'm away from dying. I'll wash up on the shore, let the waves crash over me. Bottle of whiskey, back pocket of my jeans. Got my thumb out on the road, but trying not to be seen. Scramble on the beach, already half in the bag, and the big red sun's already starting to sag. I've never felt so clearly as when I'm floating in Lake Erie. Closest I've been to flying is the furthest I'm away from dying. I'll wash up on the shore, let the waves crash over me. Fumble in my pocket for a cigarette. I'm way too young to have a habit yet. And the stars pick me up and drag me into the sky. Forgot where I was going, but my blood is still flowing. And I've never felt so clearly as when I'm floating in Lake Erie. The closest I've been to flying is the furthest I'm away from dying. I'll wash up on the shore, let the waves crash over me.
You've been listening to For the Common Good with Floyd Marinescu. The Cookie Jar is produced by Christine Bruce, with music by Elijah Larson, aired through CICK 93.9 FM in Smithers, BC, and available anytime at smithersradio.com or anywhere you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening. For more information on a universal basic income in BC, visit ubiworks.ca/BC. To get involved with the Commonwealth Initiative, check out commonwealth.ca. You can register for that next community call with Martin Adams at commonwealth.ca/community call. And you can always find us on Facebook at The Cookie Jar on CICK.